Welcome to the February 8th School Reuse Building Committee. I don't believe we have any minutes to review. Is there anyone here for public speak time? Wants to address the committee on any topic? No. Okay, not hearing any. So I'll turn over to Jeff and Emily for your direction. Go on. Go ahead.
Thanks, Joe. So we are here today to, we skipped the meeting in January, and that gave us a little time to move a couple of the items forward a little further. So the agenda includes a relatively brief presentation from Mass Development, who's going to be helping the city out with some due diligence for the project. And then Emily has a pretty brief presentation where we wanted to start talking about some of the schedules and kind of how a timeline starts to work out for the rest of the project. Little discussion of some criteria. And then we did want to touch on kind of the idea that we talked about in December about like frequently asked questions. So I think that'll be kind of the summary. And if we go, we might go a little bit past 2 at this point, just because we're a little late. But other than that, we might have a pretty brief meeting. So if it's okay, I think if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to hand it over to Ben Murphy with Mass Development to just give an overview from his point of view, and then I can jump in as needed at the end.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ben Murphy. I'm a program manager in the Real Estate Services Division of Mass Development. If you're not familiar with Mass Development, we're the State Development Finance Agency and Land Bank, and we work with businesses, nonprofits, banks, and municipalities to stimulate economic growth across the Commonwealth. Specifically in the Real Estate Division, we have a technical assistance program that we offer, and that's where I'm working with Jeff and the city on this project that's related to the 3 school buildings. And specifically, it's because the technical assistance program works, one of the things that it works with is surplus municipal property. So that's how that fits into this program. Specifically, we've been working with Jeff on identifying how we can help with this RFP process that you're working towards. And we've identified a few key items that we think we can help with. So and as part of the program, I should step back a minute. We provide a house doctor, a consultant, to come in and work with the municipality for whatever the project needs. In this case, we're working with 2. The first is VHB. They'll be the lead, and they're a civil engineering company if you're not familiar with them. But they'll produce existing conditions of the street and utility infrastructure around the 3 school buildings. They'll provide site surveys for the 3 sites, and they'll also do some conceptual drawings to see, what's possible. That certainly isn't. I want to make sure that's not a key component. That's just a very small piece, so you can't go too crazy with that. It's more of the existing conditions that we're focused on. We're also bringing in Crowley to do appraisals on the properties, and all of these documents will be part of the RFP, so that a developer pulling the RFP will have a better understanding of the site and what they're dealing with. So that's what our project is focusing on. And right now, Jeff just sent me back the MOA that we need to go into to get the project moving. And so right now that's with me going through the Mass Development process, and hopefully within the next week or so, we'll be under contract. So any questions?
Ben, does that mean that Easthampton will be under contract with your organization?
That's correct. It's an agreement with Mass Development. Mass Development does the hiring of the consultants. That's not, that agreement is between Mass Development and the consultant that we bring on. We pre-select these house doctors. We go through an RFP process. to find these consultants. So it's easy for us to bring them on board quickly for these projects.
So Ben, it sounds like your work is more preliminary site infrastructure. It's not, you're not working on what those uses would be. Is that correct? You're just sort of the surrounding environment. Is that correct? Or did I get that wrong?
Correct. Yes, that's essentially correct. There's a small component at looking at conceptually what it could be, but that's a very small component. It's really understanding what's there now for infrastructure, the public streets, the land. We're not really looking at existing conditions for the buildings. We kind of felt that what exists now is good enough for a developer coming in to understand the project. And generally developers who, if somebody's interested in rehabbing the building, any legitimate developer would have generally a good sense of what needs to be done for buildings like that coming in. So we didn't think that was worthwhile going into that too much.
I think we've been talking about this for a while, and we tried for a grant to cover this, and we didn't get the grant, but Mass Development came back to us and said we think we can help with certain parts of that project, and there is some really important value that we get out of this because the schools were purpose-built, so they're all very old, right? And they were built as schools. We don't have survey of the properties. We don't really have any information about the infrastructure around them. So even kind of just talking this through, when a developer comes in, like if you take Maple Street School, for example, there's a fence around the perimeter, and then there's these significant trees that are also on the perimeter. But when someone walks over there and whose trees are those? We don't know. We honestly don't have a survey going back 100 years to figure out where everything is, or where the buildings are situated. And all that is really critical information that a developer will need at some point. And so anything that we can do ahead of time will help us a lot. Help the developers look at the sites and then put together proposals for that. And then one thing that we're really keen on trying to do, and we learned a lot when we were looking at the mill redevelopment on Ferry Street. So, as a big development or even a renovation, so from going from schools, if they get converted to housing, for example, it'll change the demand on infrastructure, water, sewer, and drainage. But the area around those schools, we don't have information, so we don't understand the condition or quality of the sewer in the neighborhood. And so that's something that through the subcontract, they have an elaborate system. They can send cameras down, they map it, and they find deficient areas, or they find areas that are suitable. And it's really important information for us to have ahead of time. And that way we can start to be prepared if there is a redevelopment proposal, that the public infrastructure is things that the city will likely have to work towards upgrading to support the redevelopment. And there are, large funding sources for that. The main one is MassWorks. So in a situation where you're producing housing and you need to bring the infrastructure up, enhance it to provide the housing, that's what the state, in the past at least, has really wanted to fund those projects that can kind of help that final step for a project to come forward. So we're trying to get that information together now. And then later on, when a developer, because that's our goal, right? So we're going to get proposals, and as we go through that process and one is chosen, we can also go back to Mass Development and get their help to look at where do we need to fix sidewalks, and where do we need to build a new crosswalk, or where could on-street parking occur to kind of support the redevelopment. And you need to have all this survey data to do that. And so that's kind of why we're kind of hitting this now, and then it'll be available before we release the RFP. So it's really important. I see Brad's hand up. I'll stop for a sec.
Yeah, so I know in previous meetings we had talked about the possibility of total demolition of one or more of the buildings to make room for, like a 40 range or so apartment building. So would this assessment be specifically for the structure as it currently stands, or would it also be inclusive of if there was a 40 unit building put in its place? So I guess, does it include both of those, or is it specifically just the building as it stands?
We're not assuming what's going to happen in the future. We're really looking at what are the existing conditions, understanding what's there now, not building specific, but what are the property boundaries, and what are the water, sewer infrastructure, sidewalk, street infrastructure in the area of the properties.
So that would be for future developers to determine whether or not they wanted to, do something larger scale on site. So you'd just be providing them with factually what already exists.
Yes, and there's kind of an assumption that there's the infrastructure in the area may not be able to support what is proposed, and that's where looking at what needs to be upgraded depending on what comes in what's the successful proposal, and what does the city need to do to upgrade you need to know what's there to know how you have to upgrade it. So that's essentially what this will do.
And then if I can just talk about the appraisal real quick, because it's not as fancy, but it is kind of critical. So each of the properties gets an appraisal, and we talked through email. We had a presentation that we had as homework to watch some of it. The way that and I think it's kind of similar to many uses, but if you look at affordable housing in particular, that presentation talked a lot about the cost to acquire the site. So that's a huge burden in a lot of projects. If a developer has to pay for a large amount for the property, that eats into their cost to build units. But so in Massachusetts, in order for us to even consider offering the properties less than the market value, so if it's less than the market value or $1, kind of in that range, we need to have that appraisal done. And that gets built into the RFP to say that we did the appraisal, and at the city council level, before the RFP goes out, there'd have to be agreement that we would be willing to let the properties go at below market value, presumably because we'll get some kind of community benefit, from the project. So we can't even have those conversations without the appraisal. So that was kind of where, when we were talking to Mass Development, we kind of picked these three things: the appraisal, the existing conditions of the property, and then the existing conditions of the infrastructure around the neighborhood. Those were kind of the biggest bang for the buck that we wanted to kind of get with their help. So I don't know if there's more questions. Ben, I did have a question, and I just, not to put you on the spot necessarily, but in a little while we're going to talk about timelines. So I don't recall if we talked at all about like deliverables for this stuff. I know that I apologize because there's one step. I'll take one step back, which is this contract that the city signed with Mass Development. We can't just go sign a contract. So we just recently finished this process where it went to city council. Then it goes to their subcommittees and comes back to city council, and the city council authorizes the mayor to execute the agreement. So that took about a month, and we just finished that, as Ben alluded to. So kind of we really had to kind of make that process work first. But Ben, in terms of deliverables, is there anything that you have that you might be able to share in terms of when we might get some of this stuff?
Yeah, I'm looking through my emails now because I feel like this came up previously. Well, it's possible I'm thinking another project, but I don't think so. Hold on. In my mind, I was thinking April, May time period to get everything delivered. Yeah,
because surveyors have a hard time in snow. I think we were chatting before the meeting. There's not a lot of snow right now. So there's a chance that surveyors, as soon as their schedule opens up, they can get out there I think the good news for our group here is that someone said it's factual information, right? So it's kind of the facts on the ground, and they're not really going to change. It's different than what the other thing that we're talking about is like the evaluation criteria, the thing where we start to talk about more of desirability and things that we want to include. So this is kind of facts. They can come in kind of right towards the end because not too much will change because of this. So we'll slip it into the schedule whenever we can.
Yeah, I'm not finding my email right now, but it does stick in my mind that was kind of the April, May timeframe is what we're hoping for, based on what VHB gave us in their scope.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fine. I just wanted to have a little bit of that for our next discussion when we talk about the other parts of the timeline.
Sure.
Ben, is there anything else that you think this group should be aware of, or is this, I mean, how often do you guys do this? Is this pretty common for you to be kind of assisting municipalities at certain levels?
Yes, this is, I mean, especially with RFPs. RFPs are pretty common. Surplus property RFPs, we're familiar with, and we're just, in this case, it's a little easier in the sense where we're doing a piece. We're not tasked with doing the actual RFP. You have Emily working on that. So we're kind of, it's like you're hiring us out to do this aspect of your process, but we do want to be helpful where we can be throughout the entire process, even though we're focused on these specific items. We have experience with this, so certainly here if you have questions or get stuck on anything, we can try and help.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I think there is, after a developer of some sort is chosen, there might still be things that we can get assistance with mass development to kind of look at preparing the plans for new sidewalks and things like that would accompany the project. Because in that same presentation I mentioned from Valley CDC and others, it's, this is going to be kind of long. So we have, a year's worth of process after we even select someone. So that'll be important. And then I see Pat's hand up.
Just quickly. So this is just pertaining to your work is just pertaining to the outside of the building, not necessarily what they might find inside the building as far as asbestos or equipment, anything like that. This is just about the outside, the utilities and all that stuff like that coming into the building, correct?
Correct. We're not, okay. We had discussions about looking at doing more thorough existing conditions of the school, and we just didn't think there was a huge benefit to go beyond what's already out there right now. There's most likely going to be asbestos in other. There's those things are probably going to exist in any good developers knows how to deal with that stuff and knows that.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, maybe if there's nothing else, I mean, Ben, I don't know if you want to stick around and hear kind of where Emily is talking about the timeline. Either way, you're welcome to stay. You're welcome to go.
Yeah, I'll stick around. Definitely.
Okay, great. Joe, is it okay to,
sure, of course.
That makes sense. Emily, do you want to?
Yeah.
I made you co-host a minute ago. Do you want to? Does it make sense to you to talk about your slide deck that you prepared there and share that out?
Yep, I'm just going to share the screen now. And actually, we're going to start right off with the timeline. Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to see you all again. Even with a little sort of confusion at the beginning. I was coming off another call as well, which didn't help. So Jeff and Michael and I had a conversation last week to really try and firm up the timeline. We'd had a conversation earlier with the city solicitor as well to understand the back and forth of the approval process, and also with the chair of the school committee to understand their process. So at the top, you see ours in the dark blue. today's meeting with the presentation that Ben just gave, and our discussion of evaluation criteria. And we thought it might be helpful to chat with you all about the fact sheet as well. March 8th. So your homework was in part just, to have for today, but also because Valley CDC in March is going to present their pro forma work that they've been doing. And Jeff's mentioned before how they're doing a wider program of looking at affordable housing for the city, but as part of that are looking at the schools. And we've started to get some information in, so they'll have it all complete and present to you in that meeting. And what we've seen so far has been really interesting. So I'm looking forward to that presentation with you and our discussion. We'll also be doing a first review of the full draft RFP. I've been plugging away on bits of it. Obviously, some information is still coming in, although the work that Ben just described won't really impact the contents of the RFP. It will be added to that as information. So it's really our conversation today, and then pulling in some of the kind of combination of the boilerplate material that comes in and some more descriptive information about the city and its goals. Then in April, we're going to do a final review of the draft RFP and the fact sheet. So those can go to City Council. I know that Jeff had suggested in his email to you all that we might have a couple of extra meetings in that period. So we wanted to make sure that we had some dates actually established. So I want to check today and make sure March 8th and April 12th work for you. It's 4 weeks from today and then another 4 weeks from March 8th. And then we can see if we need other meetings in that period, but just be prepared for it. So that's our process. And then once we're done with the final review in April, we start on the city's process for review of the RFP. But in the meantime, the lower level is the school committee and the city council. And so we're talking about making a presentation. I have it here as February. It might end up being March, just to the property subcommittee of the city council so that they're aware of what's going on. This hasn't been finalized yet, but it was something that we were kicking out as an idea. The school committee is going to be meeting in April. And so one of the strategies we talked about is whether or not we can go ahead and have some of the votes happen, but be conditional because we're still in an active construction process. And so we don't want to, either the city council or the school committee to be making final votes. But we do want to give some clarification to anybody who might respond to the RFP that, yes, this is serious. The city and the school committee are really going to declare this surplus and dispose of it. So April 12th, the school committee would be making a conditional vote that the declaration of the property is surplus. That brings us in after some specific construction deadlines that the school committee has that would give them comfort that they're moving along at the schedule that they intend to move along on. April 14th, we would be submitting the draft RFP to the city council. So there's not a lot of room between April 12th and the 14th for our final review before it's going to the city council. But we do have time in between those two periods to do extra work if we need it. So the draft goes to the city councilors. They have a chance to review it. The next meeting of the city council is the 20th. And they would have two actions there. One is to accept the property and declare it surplus. Again, a conditional vote, and then also to refer the RFP to the property subcommittee. Then May and June, property subcommittee meet, and June and July, the city council would vote to issue the RFP. We're aware, and this reflects the fact that the city council is also dealing with the budget process at this time. So, we wanted to leave that relatively loose because we know there's plenty of other things on their plate, but just keep this open for that. And as you can see, based on the schedule that Ben just gave in terms of when they expect their deliverables to come through, it ties very neatly with this one so that the RFP would be on its way to a final approval about the time we get this supplementary information, and the two would be ready together. We're not going to have one wait on the other in order to issue the RFP once it's done. So any questions so far on the timeline, or any hiccups that you anticipate might happen that we'll want to put in here? And Jeff, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to this, any additional details?
You know me, I will always say something. The two things I took quick note on was that my understanding would be that for the school committee, that kind of the first step, they don't need the RFP. So they're kind of a little bit ahead of that and separate. So that's why it kind of happens first. They don't need to see the RFP. So that can kind of move forward on that timeline, and then we'll work to finalize the draft. The date that Emily mentioned, and this is, this is tidbits of things we are gathering along the way, but the new school has a date attached to it, which would be like a substantial completion date. So it's at the end of March. And so it doesn't mean everything's done, but in my phraseology, it's kind of like there's no going back. Like that's kind of like the contractor has to achieve certain things at the new school by March 30th. And, we'll know, there should be an update, there should be information, like, are there things that didn't get met at that date? How far off is it, and what were the things? And so if the school stays on track, which I think Pat would say, like, it has been on track. So we wanted to achieve that substantial completion date first. And then we think that the school committee would be in a good spot to just say, yeah, we don't want these properties anymore, except the students will be there till June, and we need a period of time to clean it out. So that will be there. There'll be a secondary vote later on, but that's kind of to acknowledge, like, yeah, we're done as long as the students are out, and get into the new school. And that's what the city attorney talked through. And, it's not perfect, but it does give like this clear signal that barring something really substantial, we're going forward with the disposition. So I kind of just wanted to capture that quick note there.
And I should add that the final votes would happen once everything is complete in terms of being able to turn the schools over. But there is that conditional vote, which will give some comfort to the developers that this is a serious thing and they're not wasting their time by replying to it. So any other questions or thoughts on the schedule? And also, does March 8th and April 8th, do those two dates work for you all? We're thinking the same time since this one.
Yeah, the daytime question. Do you want to tackle Pat's question first?
Yeah, it was just, and it has, as far as I know, the project's moving along. There was one little hiccup, but that's in regards to demolition. But my only question is, and it sounds like you've already kind of answered it as far as these things are conditional, is not a scheduling from this piece, but a scheduling from when and if the buildings would be turned over. So the reason I have that in my head is, like, they had this time period where Whitebrook, in between the break, the holiday break, all of the stuff from Whitebrook had to come out and go into the new building. So in my mind, I wonder, when are they going to do that? And I don't really know if that affects us. And I'm more along the lines of putting it out there. Like, are the teachers going to take all of their stuff out of those buildings in June, when they're, the teacher contracts, I assume, usually come up to a certain point, and then they're not working again until the following school year. So I guess it's more of a scheduling of getting all your stuff out of there before we give the buildings up kind of tidbit or piece that I'm putting out there. Because I don't know if their plan is to move all the stuff out in August or end of August, when the teachers would normally come back, and how that impacts anything weird. It doesn't sound like it does, but it's just, you said about scheduling pieces. It's one thing that's kind of popped into my head while we were talking.
It's a good question, and that came up in our discussion with the chair of the school committee. And the idea was the superintendent of schools, not the chair of the school committee. The idea was that, if I remember correctly, that the teachers would remove their stuff. So final day of school, teachers have about a week or so to remove all of their things from the classroom after that. And then I believe in July, the movers would come in and move out anything else that they were taking. So the idea is it would be done before the end of July. So assuming we don't get, massive blizzards and school going through August and all of that.
And this is good. I just made another note that I think this would be like one of those things we want to put in that frequently asked question.
Yeah,
kind of
absolutely.
like this, it's a great question, Pat. And I think the one thing I would just add, and just riff off what you're saying, is I don't think we'll never move as fast as what just happened with Whitebrook and the new
Right.
school. So,
Yeah.
like the general pattern would be, we do want to carve out some time for developers. So if we release this in June or July, then we want to carve out a time when developers could come in and view the schools, but they would not actually take them for probably some period of time because they do all the asbestos testing. They have architects going in there. They have to really evaluate things. And even then, they probably then go into permitting. So there's a long lead time. Like there will be no rush to demolish them, like or even do interior work. Like that'll be like a whole nother year. So I think, Pat, your question is really good, though. I like it because I think that was one of these tools that we want to use the FAQ for, is to build up these questions that we know we're going to get these questions. And then the better we can be answering them ahead of time, the easier it'll be kind of just for everybody, really.
And also to sort of preview a little bit of what you'll hear from Valley CDC, I think what Jeff said about there's not going to be a rush to construction is really important. There will be a period in which the city and the developer will be going back and forth over negotiations. Developer will be doing their own due diligence. They'll be lining up their financing. So, there's going to be quite a bit of time before anything actually starts to physically happen. And to your point, Jeff, I think that's something else that we should probably put in the fact sheet too, so that people don't expect, well, the RFP's gone out, construction should start next month. So why is nothing happening?
Chris, I saw your hand up. Sorry that we were belaboring that point, but that was an important one.
No, absolutely. I'm just looking at the referral to the property subcommittee. And do we have some sort of plan or ideas on how to interface this committee with property subcommittee? So when they get the RFP, they know what our thinking was if it's not clear enough in the RFP.
Yeah, Emily, do you want to start that conversation a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. We had kicked back and forth this idea that although our meetings might be ending, around April, that your role as people who have been involved, and particularly a committee who has been involved in the development of this RFP, would not end there. And we were hoping that we could prevail upon some of you to attend the property committee meetings, the city council meeting, to lend your voices to how this RFP was developed. So, Chris, that's a great question. And we can talk a little bit closer as we get further, or a little bit further as we get closer about how we actually do that. But certainly having your voices represented, whether physically or virtually at those meetings would be really important.
And we talked about like having this group help be like ambassadors.
Yeah.
And even if it's kind of segueing through these frequently asked questions, because everyone is on here, everyone's on this committee because you interface with different people in town, and that's kind of the value that each one is bringing to the table. I know it's been kind of like these meetings to just learn about the process, but that will be when, you guys are kind of trusted faces, people, and to have you at these meetings to help people understand what has been discussed at least, and then kind of going through the questions and answers. I really think it'll probably alleviate a lot of the anxiety that certain people have. I don't think we'll ever alleviate all the anxiety, but the things that we can run through and these questions and answers will help a lot. I think it'll help a lot of people. The people who want to know, what's really happening or what the answers are, that would be where we would build this process, like Emily said, through these series of meetings. So, we don't want to overburden you guys because we kind of talked about it like a year. So we'll be at a year, and then once a month. The tail end here, there might be a couple more meetings than once a month. Get to city councilors and their subcommittees, and then being at any of those public meetings with people who might have other questions. Great. So the last thing I'll just say, I think we will continue to massage this a little bit. So that April 20th city council, like usually it gets introduced, and there's not really any action, and it goes to the subcommittee. So that schedule just might tweak just a little bit of the phrasing of that, but that's kind of the target that we have. If Emily is going to be providing in that draft RFP, that'll really give some of the nuts and bolts of all the things that we've talked about over the time. And then I think, I forget in the agenda if I had the preview for Valley CDC, but I did want to say that we are going to ask them to come to the next meeting, because if you didn't get to see that presentation yet, it would be great if you could watch it. But what it really helps everyone understand is that there's a lot involved, and we're kind of at that beginning stage. And then, we do the RFP, and one of the things that we talked about before is having the RFP be flexible, so that, and I think with the Valley CDC presentation, we'll start to see why it's important that the RFP is flexible, because there was one graphic that was in there, which is like the number of units, but then there's these like 7 other factors that all go into what a developer would want to do with a property like these. So I think that'll be a pretty informative kind of last step, last bit of information for the committee is at the next meeting. But Emily, I don't know if you have anything to add on that, or if you want to go, did you have a slide on either the FAQ or the criteria? Yeah, this one.
The criteria is next. Yeah.
Great.
No.
Oh wait, Chris, is that your hand up? Is that a new hand? No. Okay. Sorry.
Sorry.
I have a new hand though.
Okay. So, sorry.
So, are you saying that the February there will be an RFP submitted to City Council to be referred to subcommittee?
No.
February, no.
The goal was to have an agenda item at the property committee to just give an update kind of as to where this committee has been.
Oh, okay. It's just a presentation.
With the RFP process and what to kind of like to, we want to try to give the property committee a preview of this schedule. And I think what Emily said was that at this point, it'll probably be March. We'll probably be aiming for a March meeting with that committee just to give them an update.
Okay, because I mean, at some point, I mean, this is where, is my understanding, which it may be crossing paths here, is in the charter, does this charter say the city council, the property subcommittee is supposed to create the RFP? I mean, I'm concerned that there's going to be confusion over whose responsibility this is to create the FRP, especially in light of the charter wording.
Yeah, we can continue to brush up on that. I mean, our understanding was that the city council makes a recommendation on the RFP, whether or not it goes out as it's written. Okay. But the creation of it, when we started this committee here, the city attorney said that through the mayor has the authority to build this advisory committee for this purpose, which is to prepare, this group and the work with Emily is to prepare a draft. So we are simply providing a draft to city council, and city council can change it, add to it, and will kind of vote to recommend that it be released. So Joe, it's a question you've asked before. I think it's a good time that we brush up on this and get a solid answer that in terms of the charter, I think.
Because I've already gotten calls from property subcommittee members who are just inquiring about what our role is. Matter of fact, I talked about, I have a call in from the Gazette who would like to talk about our role. So I would like to clarify that as well.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that in advance of kind of going to the property committee for the update. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
That could in fact be part of the update, is that discussion and confirmation. So our last few meetings have been talking about the draft evaluation criteria. Jeff mentioned the flexibility component before, that none of us wanted to create criteria that was so onerous that either reduce the number of respondents or reduce their flexibility in addressing some of the needs. In addition, we were talking about a couple of things such as, sustainability and other sort of design components of the criteria. And some of these things that we looked at for example, the city has already adopted the stretch energy code, which would have covered many of the things that we talked about. So in thinking about the conversations that we'd had at past meetings, talking a little bit with Jeff and Michael, what I've done here is I've pulled out those criteria that seemed to be addressing the highest number of concerns or preferences for our conversations. These won't be the only evaluation criteria. So for example, we will have evaluation criteria around the financial feasibility of the proposal. Did they meet the minimum requirements, and which takes them to just even the next stage. Is what they're doing financially feasible? Does the team have the experience, et cetera, et cetera? All of those will be part of the evaluation criteria, but they're relatively standard. So in that many RFPs have those. So what we wanted to do today was focus the conversation on those things that seem to be specific to this community. And what I've done is I've pulled those out, and I'll talk through them a little bit, and then just give you an idea of how the criteria could be set up. We talked about the not advantageous or less advantageous, and highly advantageous. And I've just put some text in there for us to consider about how this could work. So we picked obviously the affordable housing because of the city's need for affordable housing and the possibility that these buildings could and sites could address that. We also wanted to talk about community connections as part of the evaluation. And you see the way that it's set up here is actually more of a menu, in that there are, let's talk about this because you'll see the last one is number of sites in the proposal. There are 3 schools. We've been talking back and forth about whether we want, somebody to do all 3, to do 1 of the 3, 2 of the 3. And one of the things that we've been kicking around since the last time we all spoke was this idea that, in fact, there are really, or could really be 2 sites. One is the Maple School and one is Center and Papin as a single site. And there's some advantages and disadvantages, which we'll talk about when we get to that. But I bring it up here because each school has community connections that could be part of this, whether it's the gym at Papin or public parking at Maple or a neighborhood playground at any of these. So rather than saying, we want you to do X, you must save the gym or you must provide a public or a neighborhood playground, is giving them the option of doing 1 or more of these and then setting up the criteria to rate them depending on the number of community connections that they provide. And the use of the word community connections actually came out of the conversation that Jeff and Mike and I had with Valley CDC last week, where they were updating us on where they were. And they had talked about one of the things that they like to do is include connections between the people living in the affordable housing and the neighborhood, so that it doesn't feel like it's, here's the affordable housing and never shall it meet with the neighborhood. And Michael, just said the word community or the phrase community connections. I thought, oh, well, that's a great bucket for all of the things that we've been talking about here. So the affordable housing, the community connections. The next one we wanted to talk about was responsive design. And of course, we've gone back and forth a little bit in our discussions as to, must they save the buildings? Can they add something to the site? Can they take the buildings down completely and build all new? Whatever they do, we wanted the design to be responsive, or we wanted the criteria to set up to encourage design that was responsive to the built environment. Now, we can go a lot more detail than just it being responsive to the built environment, but I'm putting that in for us to talk about today. And then finally, in our conversations back and forth, this committee and then offline, thinking about it a little bit, there are certain advantages to the city having to deal with a single developer or maybe 2 developers. There's also definite advantages in knowing and being comfortable with the fact that all sites can be dealt with at once, and particularly with Center and Pepin because of their close relationship to each other. So this last, close physical relationship to each other, how they would relate, and also issues about parking each site. So this last one creates a situation in which including Center and Pepin as a single site is an advantageous response. And then all three sites, doing all three schools, so 2 sites, is a highly advantageous response. So I know we sent this out, or Jeff sent this out to you before the weekend, hoping you'd have a chance to look at it and maybe start thinking about these. But I'm interested to know, how you feel about what you see on the screen. Are there things, what would you like to tweak? Is this the right mix so far? And then are there things that you feel came out of our conversation that are missing that you would like to make sure are included? So I'll stop there and wait for some questions or responses.
Well, my first response is I think this is a really helpful encapsulation of the requirements that we've been discussing. So thank you.
Group effort with Jeff and Michael's discussion back and forth. So thanks to both of them as well.
Yeah, I'm impressed. I really felt this was like herding cats. And although the categorizations are broad, I think they do fit into important points with, everything from the affordable housing to the community, just putting community and letting the developer then pick what they're willing to do. We talked about the different sites, one or how many RFPs. I think it's a great, general categorization of all that information. I thought it was well done.
One question: what is AMIs? Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Area median income. We get so used to throwing this jargon around, we sometimes forget. Area median income. Okay. So the affordable housing can be provided at different levels, different percentages of area median income. So instead of saying, for example, we want all 80% or we want all 50%, we know there's a need in the city. So it was saying if you're going to just hit the 80% AMI, that's not really helping us, which is why that's not advantageous. If you can do it across a wider version, so maybe there's some 30%, maybe there's 50, maybe there's 80, that's advantageous. And if you can do it while allowing for different sizes of families, because family affordability is always an issue, then we're going to be really happy to see that. So that's why I put that in highly advantageous. And again, completely open to moving these around, but that's sort of based on what I was hearing from our previous conversations.
And again, I sometimes ask silly questions because I just don't know any better. But as far as the community, I love this layout, by the way. My question is the community connections in this piece, isn't that something more along the lines of what the city would do versus a developer, meaning public parking or the playground? Wouldn't that be something the city would build? So how is this relevant to an RFP? And again, maybe a stupid question, but I'm asking because I want to understand it.
Not even remotely a stupid question. That is a fabulous question. In fact, should go on the FAQ as well, as why aren't these city responsibilities? So what we're looking at is the developer is going to be getting the land for less than market value. They are going to be creating something that, the city wants in terms of the affordable housing, but we don't want it to just be affordable housing. We want it to have some sort of relationship to the community. And so in exchange, it's really in exchange for getting these properties as a lower cost than market value. We'd like to see the following things. One of them is the affordable housing. One of them is these community benefits that provide benefits for more than just the people who are living on the site. And if they're done right, actually connect the people to living on the site to the wider community, which we felt was important. Perfect question.
I think that is a great question. I wrote down too. And I think, Pat, the other thing to take a step back to is when we did the downtown strategic plan, we had two workshops that were really well attended, and we have that document which they really kind of did pull, these got pulled out. These are the things that were over and over again kind of reiterated by residents of Easthampton, the things that they would hope to see. And like there's an opportunity, I think there's that opportunity to try to get some or all of these out of the redevelopment, which I think is pretty common. The one thing I wanted to add for discussion and to see where it goes, maybe it goes on here, maybe it doesn't, but I know that in the past meetings we talked about like mixed uses or commercial uses, and part of this is a little premature because I think after the next meeting with Valley CDC, I think one of the things that seems to be becoming a little bit more clear is that, well, first we have a goal, in Easthampton to build, actually build more affordable housing. But in the affordable housing development world, there are actually a lot of funding sources available. May not be easy. And they will say, I think it's very complex and layered, but there are tax credit programs and there are subsidies and there are programs that a affordable housing developer can access to take a school and do those deep dive renovations that it's just not clear that we see it's unclear at this point whether it's likely that a developer would take on these big costs to renovate the building into mixed use. And so that's kind of why it's not on here, but I did want to ask the group, like, maybe should we acknowledge the notions of mixed use somewhere in case one of the buildings gets proposed for mixed use? Because I know, I see Chris is kind of nodding. I know it came up in the last couple of meetings and it's just not kind of showing here. So I kind of want to just see what the discussion was about that.
I also want to add to that one of the other things that we talked about in terms of mixed use is that, of course, the downtown strategic plan was done pre-COVID, and the market for the moment for retail and restaurant and other sort of classic ground floor uses has shifted. This may roar back as in a few more months, or it may take a few more years to roar back. But the idea of not taking away development that could be going into the downtown was something that we kicked around a little bit. And then the other thing is retail classically. Restaurants might have a little bit more flexibility depending on what they're set up as, and of course, there are emerging uses such as co-working or makerspace or things like that. But in general, retail really wants to have a ground floor use that's on a main street that's really connected to the street. And the disadvantage of the ground floors of the schools is that they're up steps, or you have to climb to get into them. The windows don't lead themselves to being real storefronts. So were they to be mixed use, they'd have to be pretty creative about the mix of uses. So I think Jeff's question is to all of you about, how does this committee feel about acknowledging mixed use, including mixed use, not including mixed use is a really important one at this stage. But I want to clarify some of the other reasons it wasn't on here.
Chris, I see your hand, and then Pamela.
Sure, that all makes sense. I mean, it would be nice to have mixed use, but I wouldn't want to sacrifice affordable housing at the altar of mixed use. But at the same time, in the highly advantageous and affordable housing, when we're talking about a wide range of AMIs, we're not including like luxury lofts on the top floor, right?
Yeah, that could be a good clarification. We could set a maximum AMI if we wanted to, a wide range of AMIs up to X. That's a really good point, because there are developments that'll do like 110 or 120% of AMI, and that may not be where this community wants to go for any of the units.
Yeah, that would be great. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I kind of like the concept of some kind of mixed use, because I think what Jeff was saying is it might open us up to additional funds if we have that flexibility. I do understand, the question mark relating to COVID and what that will mean. I also sometimes think about, the general feeling in the community. I am completely comfortable because I've been on properties before that took forever to sell, having a very low price for someone who is willing to put in a project we want. I guess there may be, I'm concerned there may be a percentage of the community that would like to see it to generate some kind of income, or either, maple sweeping of market rate housing or something that they feel that there is an opportunity for those buildings to help the bottom line of the city. So maybe some degree of mixed use may help that a little bit.
So I'll answer that, and then I saw Pamela's hand up as well. I don't want to lose her, but my understanding is that these will all have to pay property taxes. So real estate property taxes for the community. That was certainly in the pro formas that the draft pro formas that we saw. So there will be that generation of income for the city.
If Pioneer Valley does a project, is that still the case? And wasn't there something about a non-for-profit wouldn't have to pay that?
We can double check on that, but I'm sure I saw real estate taxes in that pro forma. I don't have it up in front of me. Might be a good question for them on March, actually. So, Pamela, did you still have a question?
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Brad. I just had a question before we were talking about mixed use, and it came up when I watched most of the video, and maybe because it was happening in Beverly, but they talked about a window of time when the public can comment on potential developments, and another window of time where the public could take legal action against these developments. And I hadn't thought of that before, but I also remembered that some residents moved the developments on Parsons Street. So I just wondered if there was any thought or conversation about what if something like that happens, or, what can we do to also that the CDC in Beverly worked to make their developments match as close as possible to market value apartments across the road and stuff. So just want to throw that in there.
Jeff, do you want to talk about the city's permitting and approval process? Because I think that's where those windows come in.
Sure. Yeah, no, Pamela, those are good questions. Right now, we have like this thing called the Smart Growth Zoning Overlay, which covers most of the downtown. The one exception, and we're in the process of fixing it, is the Pepin School. For some reason, when the lines got drawn, it came down whatever that little street is in between the schools, and Pepin was not in this. But we have a process underway right now that's going to try to fix that. And why I'm explaining that is because in that video they talked about housing developments, right? So if you call it multifamily or any kind of housing development, allowing them by right means that they don't get that appeal process. So it is supposed to be a benefit to the developers. It gives them a little more predictability and takes it. And this isn't to take away from the residents' input, because the process will have a public hearing and people can provide input. But after there's a vote of the board, there's no appeal process. And that's the one where in that video they talked about like a special permit or a comprehensive permit. If those have an appeal period where abutters can appeal a project and bring it to court, and they can delay it for years that way. And so that was the conversation that was in that video. And so we're in a good spot to have the schools basically covered by this by right zoning for multifamily. So we've been taking steps to kind of roll in Pepin. And, there was another tweak that is in that same zoning packet that is important, because I think Valley will mention this next month, but it was really designed for looking at like going down Cottage Street, for example. It says that you cannot have residential units on the first floor. because you really want to have commercial activity. You want to have like a window, and you want to have a door where people can come and go to any kind of use. But in the case of these schools, and so that says you can't have residential on the first floor, and it would apply to the schools. So we're amending that out. So like the schools could all be, every floor of the buildings could be housing, and that's something that we wanted to make sure was an option, because if you look at Pepin, for example, it's got a grand staircase up, and if you looked at the outside of the building and it was housing, like it would be perfectly fine. It would fit really well. So we wanted to make sure that we made kind of those tweaks to our zoning. And so it's being reviewed by the state now. And so we would expect to have the zoning fixed up by roughly like April or May. So it would coincide with us releasing the RFP.
One other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Pamela, I want to say that's an excellent question. That's again something that we can address in the FAQ is where does the public have an opportunity to comment on not just the RFP, obviously through the city council process, but when the selected developer comes to actually have their projects permitted, what's the public role and their opportunities there? That's a great question to have an answer in the FAQ.
Yeah, and then there's one more thing I just wanted to put a plug in, because I think Brad's aware of this, but we have another project underway through the planning department and through the Affordable Housing Partnership, which is a community engagement process. And the idea over the next several months is that we're going to facilitate some meetings with folks, and the goal is to build a coalition of people who will come out for the RFP, or more importantly, when someone comes in and proposes to do something with the schools, and if it's affordable housing, we would have a coalition of people who would come to those meetings and speak in favor of the fact of this, providing affordable housing. Because I think the case that you mentioned, on Parsons Street, we had no such coalition of people, and the loudest voices were the ones being heard the most. And it's a real strategy, and they use it out east a lot, which is to balance those public meetings with people who say, we need this, we want this, it fits in our neighborhood, that kind of thing, to counterbalance the people who might not say those things too. So we're trying to move these parts together so that it would be like a year or two from now when there's an actual development proposal with a public hearing. But in that year or two, we could build a coalition of people who really support affordable housing and will kind of like speak in favor of it. So that was a sidebar, but it is something that's kind of coinciding with all of this other work.
Pat, I see your hand. Oh, sorry. I think Mike had his hand up earlier than Pat, you. So, Michael?
Yeah, I was just curious, demolition versus preservation of the buildings, would that be evaluated under responsive design? Or has the committee determined whether they want to see allow demolition of the buildings, or a preference for preservation?
You notice I didn't put that in there because I don't think we've come to a decision on that. So that can be something that we can continue to discuss.
Just wanted to throw that out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Michael, that's good. I think that was a big one to hit kind of direct. I think I want to hear from the committee. We had talked about this a little bit, which was that if there was a proposal to demolish one of the buildings, it would then have to provide something more, right? So we did talk about how these are old buildings and there's only so much you can squeeze out of them. So like energy efficiency, or we don't want to ask for the existing building to be LEED certified, something that would be like impossible. So we might be a little bit easier on those criteria for reusing the buildings. But if they do build a brand new building, then the LEED certification pops up. I remember talking about that. And then the other one was maybe more units. Like, so because you're going to be in a shell of a building, you can get X number of units in the building. But if we are talking about a new structure, then we would want a larger number of units. So we did talk about those kind of things. And Emily, I don't know if that's like something we can cram in if this would be multiple pages of this kind of criteria once it's laid out.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So this can be more than one page of criteria. So, and if that's something that the committee is interested in putting in, I'm happy to add that for our next discussion. So even if you don't want to make a decision today, I'm still happy to add that for our next discussion. We can go through it when we see the context of the plan itself. So I'll just mark to do that.
If I could just pipe in real quick.
Yeah.
My impression from past meetings is that, the affordable housing is paramount to this group, and that, if we could preserve some of the existing buildings, great, but that affordable housing really takes precedence, and so, that we would entertain all options, including demolition. That's my impression of the consensus. I could be wrong.
I think I agree with that. That's my impression as well. And I think that this is a perfect example of not being too constrictive with the RFPs and letting the developers have more of a creative outlet in what they can and can't do.
Yep.
Great. Then I'll add that and apologize for missing that from my notes. So I'll put that in. Pat, you had a question?
So it almost, that whole conversation almost tied into what I was going to say. Because I started to, as I was, reading through here, I know we originally were talking about the mixed use piece, and that's where my question was, and as I started to look at the responsive design, I think when we talked about mixed use, there was, in that discussion, it was more along the lines of not if the building was staying, more along the lines of if the building was going. At least in my head, it was. It doesn't necessarily mean that was a consensus, but I started to look through these, the advantageous, not advantageous, and I think there is an opportunity for some mixed use in one, if not a couple of those properties. But my thought on that is it was going to be more along the lines if the building was, it was a new construction versus the existing buildings. So I don't know if that really helps, but I thought it fit into that responsive design piece almost, and it tied into if they were taking it down versus renovating what's there.
That's great. That's a great point.
So Pat, are you basically saying that don't consider mixed use unless the building is torn down?
Almost. Well, not. Well, I think. Yeah, I mean, I really am. I think that is the only way you're going to get somebody to do mixed use. If you think about some of those challenges that a contractor or developer would have as to trying to create a first floor, there's no windows, there's no easy access, those things like that. So yeah, I think that's probably, if they are going to tear the building down, then mixed use is on the table. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually with that, I can start to see how that would fall into the not advantageous, advantageous, highly advantageous bucket. It's like, if you do this, maybe it's highly advantageous is you must have, X% more units. I'll think about that. And then highly advantageous is X% more units plus mixed use or something like that. I'll work it into the categories, and then we can kick it around a little bit more at the next meeting. So I think that works well. I know we are about 15 minutes over our time, so I just want to quickly just run through the next 2 slides, and then we can jump back. We've already started to identify a bunch of questions for the fact sheet, so if you have any others, let me know, and I'll put together what I have. I say page 1 and page 2, but this could just as easily be something that somebody scrolls through on a website. We just wanted to make sure that we hit the community benefits rather, and the flexibility up at the top. I think the middle one changes a little bit based on our discussion today. You have your homework, and then just the next steps, again, confirming that March 8th and April 12th work for you all. And then if we think we need, if when we get to March 8th, we think we need another meeting in between the two of them, we can set that up at the time.
So does the 1 o'clock time frame work, generally speaking, for everybody? Does that seem doable? This is a good group for this. It was a strange delight to be getting ready for a meeting at like noon, and I was like, "What? This is different. I'm usually getting ready for a meeting at like 6 o'clock." So let's move forward with this. And I totally agree with Emily that I think on March 8th we'll have Valley CDC, and then we'll have a draft RFP. And I think we will need another meeting just to kind of keep pace with the multiple actions. And then I'm really cognizant of like then the other request would be to potentially come to a couple of the city council meetings or like the property subcommittee meeting. And so there'll be a couple extra meetings that we're hoping that we can get some or all of you folks too. But other than that, we don't want to overwork you guys. And Emily, what was the FAQs? Does anyone have any that they want to shout out? Is there anything that anyone has like written down that they want to say real quick? Or Chris?
We should have a place where people could watch or links to these meetings, right?
Yeah.
The question and answering the question of when this is all going to happen and how we arrived at all the things that we did.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and if you're not aware, I have been building a web page, so all of the videos are there now, and minutes from the meetings, and then the documents that have been kind of provided so far are all there. So that does exist currently, which is good.
But adding that link to the document's a great idea. It doesn't hurts to put it out to more and more places.
And especially the part from, those original meetings that we gathered all the data from, so that people are aware that what we worked with was not something we came up with, it's what the community came up with.
Right.
Yeah, to Joe's point, the links to I think we have recordings of the community project, don't we, Jeff?
Yeah, yep. Yeah, because each one of them had a presentation at the beginning, and then they kind of have the open house where there's not like as much video content of the open house part, but the introductions are all there. Yep. Yeah, so I can start to put that together too, so it's going to be available. One of the FAQs I threw out in the email was, why would the city sell the properties for $1? And I think after the Valley CDC meeting next time, I think hopefully everyone will understand the merits of that, because that's just a huge cost for a developer that immediately takes a lot of stuff off the table right away if they have to pay full price. One other quick idea is I could set up a Google Doc, and we could send it out if anyone wants to drop questions in there. Maybe I could give like a little time frame, by such and such a date, can you kind of drop questions in there? That way Emily and I can kind of brush through them before the next meeting.
I like that idea.
Okay. All right. Good.
And sometimes you don't know when that question pops into your head. Oh, that would be a great question.
Exactly.
Great. Yeah, well, I'm happy to do that. Great. Well, I don't know if there's anything else. Joe, is there anything else that you had on your mind? Any other questions?
No, I don't. I mean, unless anyone else
Has a comment or something to say, then we could just take a motion to adjourn, I guess.
I just want to say thank you for the 1 o'clock meeting. Preach.
Happy it worked out.
Yeah, I think
Happy
it's
it worked
great.
out.
And Jeff, take the rest of the night off.
I'm not. Yeah, we have some like one of these viruses that everyone knows about these days.
Oh, no.
The capital C.
Yeah.
2 out of 4 of my family has it right now, so I'm at for a while. I don't yet, but it was coming.
Well, watch some TV then tonight. Don't be watching the Zoom meeting. Or read a book or something. I don't know. Go crazy.
Yeah, no, I want to thank Ben too. Ben, thanks for coming and explaining your role here. It's really appreciated.
You're welcome. No problem.
Okay, Pat, second my motion, Pat.
Second your motion. I make
Okay,
a
all
motion
those-
to adjourn the meeting.
Yes, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, see you March 8th.
Thank you.
Great.
Yeah.
All right, thanks,
Everybody
everybody.
have a great day.
Bye.